feeling missing, but maybe it's just stripes, super stripes.
Yeah, you're right. Are you a game person?
Yes, yeah, these are mine.
Really?
The first one is an Apple II game that I wrote in like the early 80s.
Really?
It's running in an emulator on the web. It's on archive.org. So that's why I can get the web access. And the other one is one I'm working on currently, which is kind of like a revisitation of it.
That's awesome.
So these pictures are showing kind of similar rooms in the old and the new.
And when did you make the original one?
It was published in '85, and then the company like disappeared. The company like went under, so it basically never got sold. It got traded around on floppies because that's what people did. And then like around 1995, 96, every now and then I'd start getting emails from somebody saying, "Did you actually make that game? Because I found it and it was mysterious, and I didn't know what to make of it, and I remembered it."
Why is it mysterious?
It's an abstract game, and there's no instructions, especially if you get it like on some random floppy disk of arcade games.
It's a bit of the, what do you call it, the E.T. problem, where it seemed like a terribly designed game, mostly because people playing it didn't have any of the instructions, you know? The original E.T., the Atari version.
I've heard about this, but I know nothing about the game. I just know that they dug it up recently, literally dug it up recently.
Because all the ones that were discarded. But yeah, apparently people thought it was like poorly designed and poorly made, but it's basically like, you know, one of the first adventure games.
Oh, okay.
You know, it has all the components of what your modern adventure games is. You know, you find a key. It's very bare bones. Wow, that modern version's rather different. What are you using to make that?
It's my own engine.
Really?
So it's super simple. There's like no shadows or anything. It's just a straight OpenGL and C++.
Just good old OpenGL. Not a lot of people enjoy that. It takes a special type of person.
Well, you know, I used to write this in, 6502 assembly code, so...
So it's a lot better. It's a vast improvement.
So this picture is actually the floppy disk. It's on one of my floppy disks. It's one I found on a Wares site for...
What do you mean that's all the data on the disk?
It's a 140K floppy disk image rendered in Photoshop. And then I used this to get some of the original characters out for the alphabet, the font.
Huh.
Because I wanted to use the same font from the original game, like here. And then I wrote that into Photoshop and cleaned it up.
Wow. So that's all the data on the floppy.
Right, so that's the code and some of the object shapes that you can kind of make out.
But yeah, that corrects.
How long did this game take you to make?
It's a work in progress, and I've been working on it for a little over a year now.
Right, yeah.
That's all? Did you already have a basis for the engine, or did you start the engine from scratch a year ago?
Right, yeah.
If I count engine, that was about 6 months before that. Just kind of getting the engine, although it's still there's little tweaks.
That's impressive.
But it's like super minimal engine. Only does the physics is only boxes.
Right.
There's no gravity, no shadows.
Yeah.
I do shading tricks to kind of give it some depth.
Yeah.
Kind of a flat, glowy look.
That's very appealing. So how do you play the game?
Well, when you sit down, there's no controls to start.
Oh, is it cheating to ask you how to play?
Absolutely, it's cheating to ask.
No, I won't ask. I retract that question.
We haven't talked about it. I'm David Van Brink, and I'm working on this game, Metareal. And
sorry, I'm
asked
terrible.
if I played games also, and I actually hadn't been playing games for quite a long time. And just sort of at random, I got a copy of Stanley Parable because I heard it was interesting.
Yeah.
And I just loved it. It was awesome. And I played another game, 140, which is sort of minimal musical timing game.
Yeah.
Super minimal graphics, these two-dimensional solid colors, and it was just.
And is that what
Totally fun.
Is that what inspired you to start to reinitiate your development of your games?
And I think right around the same time I'd gotten like yet another email from someone who discovered like who wrote Metareal or the original Ankh.
Really?
Because every once or twice a year someone would send me an email and sometimes they'd be short, sometimes they'd be longer, and I'd be all like, oh, that's exciting.
So what you're asking me is, can you
So it just kind of, and I was getting some free time, so it kind of came together and I started to work on this.
I don't want to interfere with other people playing your game.
Yeah, you can see I was kind of channeling the retro look, at least in total screens.
How did you? I want to ask how you did that, but it's very interesting.
It's basically a shader that emulates character generator hardware.
Really?
So the shader can, this part of the shader can only make characters.
So what was your experience making character generators? And like, is that something you were already familiar with?
I've done electronics, so I know how to send out video timing signals and stuff like that.
Really?
But I think also I'd seen recently, I think I looked at the test mode of PacMan under MAME, and I went through like a similar cycle, like showing all the characters, A, B, C, D, E, filling the screen.
Wow. Kind of reminds me of old Macs too. They used to do that. There was a certain command you could enter in the Apple II, and the computer would go through a cycle of like all the graphics.
Oh, okay.
A graphics sort of test, I think.
Yeah, so it's kind of
What was the genesis of that game?
I've always liked abstract things. So I knew I didn't want to make a game that like had a story or characters or familiar objects. So I think I was just taking that as far as I could go, but still making it understandable. Like you can tell it's a thing, and there's rooms, and you go places.
And how long did that game take you to make?
About a year.
About a year.
Yeah, way less than games take now.
How many levels is it?
It's only one big level, and that's true of both of these games.
Really?
It's an open world. So actually, this is possibly the first, or at least a very early, open world abstract puzzle game.
Huh.
Because there's the title of the game is 64 rooms. And you can move between the rooms up to a point.
So is there
as you open various doors.
So is that basically a sequel of this game? Not really.
No, I wouldn't say it's a sequel. It's kind of a similar idea.
The GUI elements seem to be, or UI elements seem to be similar. Where you have
I was trying to channel appropriately the looks from this game, but as a modern 3D-ish first-person game.
Huh.
It can't be a sequel because there's no story.
It can't be?
I don't know.
I guess
Sequel usually implies that there's some
connective narrative.
Thank you.
That's interesting. I never would have thought of it that way. Certainly there's a lot of games like PacMan. Does PacMan have a narrative?
Right. Is Ms. Pac-Man a sequel?
Good point.
I don't know, but it's probably a similar relationship.
So you were telling me how did you program this game?
That was all straight 6502 assembly language.
And so what is that like to someone who has no idea what assembly language is like to program in?
It's a lot of three-letter codes that do a very small amount of work, like LDA 23 to load the value 23 into a certain register. So to get a pixel to show up on the screen, you load a certain value into a certain memory location.
So that would be very difficult. How would you keep track of all of the things you were doing? You probably wouldn't be able to do that inside the programming environment. So would you know separately what you were creating? Do you know what I mean?
No, really, it's the same as programming now. It's just no different.
Huh.
We have higher level languages now, but it's all the same.
Really?
A programmer today still has to keep track of zillion things that may or may not be in the code.
So what are you thinking about for your next game, or are you planning that far in the head, or this is your...
If I could imagine the end of this game, I might think about a future game.
Really?
But no intent beyond the end of this.
And what have you done in the interim of the first game and the second games?
Just worked for boring non-game software companies.
Just being a real software engineer.
Most recently worked at Skype.
Really?
Doing like, server, web server, API stuff. The opposite of this kind of fun stuff.
Do any of the skills carry over?
Not really.
No.
I mean, it's all engineering. It's all software.
So do you consider yourself an artist? I mean, do you look at your...
Secretly, sure.
Yeah, secretly, yeah.
Well, this show is put on by the VGA Art Gallery, so...
They clearly
it's a
acknowledge
QED.
you as being an artist. Yeah, oh, I see what you mean. That is an open question. So what would you say your philosophy is toward game design? What is your approach?
In my case for this, be as self-indulgent as I want, because it's all mine. I don't expect to make money from it, so I'm freed from all constraints, except finishing it before I run out of money or die.
It seems like you don't spoon feed the player any information. Like each step in the game is learning the game.
Yes.
That's a similar thing you might find in like Portal. And so
Portal's a beautiful game.
yeah.
Yeah, Portal's of the few games I've played, that's one of them, and that's super compelling. And actually, someone wrote to me in about 2010. He wrote a blog entry saying, "I don't know if anybody else remembers this game called Ankh. In effect," he wrote, "it was the Portal precursor, but in primitive pixels."
Really?
So I was at that point I hadn't heard of Portal. I was at 2010, must have been later. I forget when Portal came out. But anyway, so he wrote this blog entry after Portal had come out. I already knew what that was. But and at that point I hadn't played it yet, so I kind of had it on my list of things I wanted to check out.
Right. Have you played Portal 2?
Yes, I actually enjoyed that more than Portal 1 because it was technically easier, but more humorous in the story.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they had really matured into what the game, how it would be approached, and then they really could have time to kind of flesh it out and make it into a more full game.
Well, it was just great fun. I mean, they were both just great fun.
Do you read any science fiction, or
Tons. I love science fiction.
really? What are some of your favorite science fiction novels?
Rudy Rucker, Greg Egan. Do you know either of them?
Rudy Rucker, and who's the other one?
Greg Egan.
Greg Egan? No. I was reading Harlan Ellison before I came here, A Boy and His Dog, and usually I read Larry Niven and that kind of thing.
I've read all of Larry Niven, the Moon Space series, and his last few books I was less excited about, but his early, kind of 70s, 60s, 80s.
Do you feel like there's a connection between, that's a leading question, I'm sorry, do you feel like there's a connection between the science fiction sort of culture in the 60s and 70s and the modern gaming culture?
Ooh. Well, there's a lot of science fiction games. I think puzzle games in particular, there's a very similar mindset of doing science to try to figure out the world. Like, in Portal, you have to be a scientist to kind of start understanding how everything works.
That's a good point. You're kind of a science...
I try to do that here as well. Like, as you say, you start with nothing, and all you can do is push buttons and try to figure out what's the cause and effects. And over the course of the game, the cause and effects will be more and more remote. At first it's like, okay, push a button and you can see what happens. And then, the second button is you press, something happens that you can't immediately see. So those connections will become increasingly abstract over the course of the game.
Which is why you wouldn't let me play the second level without playing the first level, because I would be lost. Huh. Well, that was actually compassionate of you.
Yeah, although it does raise some questions like, to get the game good, it has to be play tested. Like each of the levels you want to play test and kind of see if someone's able to understand what's going on. But it also, only makes sense from the beginning. So I'm not quite sure how to go about that. Like have some cheat modes to jump into the middle or something. Huh. Try split the difference.
Well, it was really good talking to you.
Well, thanks.
Very similar to what I was doing.
Yeah,
except,
that kind of
much
looks
more
like it.
interactive and
So if you randomize all the
oh
parameters,
man,
so the trick to get
wild.
the weird colors is to put the brightness through something nonlinear. So I have RGB going through like several sine waves of different sizes. Because if it's linear, then you either get like all white or all black, like pins, the pins to primary colors.
Yeah.
But if it's nonlinear, then it starts finding these like
So do you do that in the shader?
it's all in the shader.
So it's in Brink. Are you doing that?
Yes. Yeah, the vertex shader is just like mapping some plots.
Yeah.
And then there's so in some of the parameters, one of the parameters is how much of the previous frame to leave, which corresponds. Okay, let me back up a moment. Have you ever taken a video camera and pointed at the TV screen?
Mhm.
You get like a Hall of Mirrors effect. Now, if you do this on an old TV screen, one that's like a phosphor TV screen, old TVs have a row of buttons, knobs at the bottom, like brightness and contrast, and you can crank those up. So you crank up the color and brightness and contrast, and then put your camera on a good tripod, so you can just turn it a little bit, and you can just sort of really complicated like spiral patterns. So that's what I'm doing here. So one of the parameters is the opacity of the new frame, and that kind of corresponds to the phosphor, the luminous decay, I guess phosphor decay, like how long the image persists. And by turning that up, you get slightly more stability because it doesn't flicker quite as much. So like if I turn the phosphor all the way down, so there's no persistence, then it's like more sparkly, like much less stable, and more flickery. And if you turn up the phosphor, it kind of smooths it out a little, goes slower. And if we add more blur to it, then it gets really slow. And you start getting these pictures that almost freeze.
I'm glad that I showed that to you.
The shader test, I think.
It's simulating video feedback with shaders.
Oh.
And it's also set up so if you have like a USB Nintendo controller, so I've used this as an installation piece with controllers.
Yeah, you get some really good results here.
I've seen someone do something similar with this, but I think it fed back into some sort of synthesizer, so it was making weird ass
right
noises
on.
Video
too.
synthesizers?
Yeah,
Like classic,
but I mean like for
like
audio
synthesizers.
stuff too.
Oh, yeah, and it would be good to have some
But
sound
similar,
inputs
not the
to
same.
it. And I just played with it a lot to find parameter ranges that were mostly interesting. Because there's a huge amount of the parameter space is just like gray, all gray. A lot of it's stable too, it has these stable configurations. Sometimes it takes a while to set up. You want to drive around?
Yeah, sure.